Thank you for including me in your program. I'm delighted to be here and always impressed with the Kentucky Chamber, and the work that you all do is pretty spectacular. Very strong leadership in many, many areas, and certainly in the area of knowing your political leadership and working with your political leadership. You have a very, very impressive record. Nothing really happens unless you have the kind of relationships that this organization has with your leadership in Washington and your leadership in the state capitol, not just with the governor and his team, but with the legislators also. And because of those relationships, you all have been able to do some very, very strong work in the area of infrastructure, and certainly many other areas too. I'm just going to talk for a minute about sort of what I see as the status of infrastructure, a little bit about the future, and maybe just a word or two about some challenges that you all will be facing as you move forward. I want to first congratulate you and the legislature and the governor for your P3 legislation, which I'm told really becomes law and comes into effect today. And I know that many of you that are involved in infrastructure look forward to using that as a tool to attract a lot of private dollars for some big projects in your state. And that's really what the P3 allows you to do. It allows you to do big things, whether it be bridges or roads that have languished for the lack of the kind of significant dollars that are really necessary. And having the P3 now really institutionalized in your state really sends a message around the country to venture capitalists and others who have this infrastructure money, that you're ready to do business and that you have the ability and the legal authority to do it. And I think you're all going to be in a position to become a model for other states. I think other states are going to be looking at Kentucky and looking at your P3 legislation as a model for how to really attract the kind of dollars that are languishing right now because there aren't the legal instruments that allow for the use of those. So congratulations to all of you that worked on that. You've really become a model for the rest of the country, and I wish you well in really looking at the opportunities. There's no question that you can't attract jobs and economic opportunity without infrastructure. If you talk to the companies that have come to this state that have not been the traditional employers in this state and the reasons why they've come here, obviously they've come because there's a good business climate. There's also people here who are employable or retrainable. But without infrastructure, you cannot attract businesses to come to your state. And if this state and you all want to grow and really help your people get the kind of employment and the kind of good paying jobs, you have to have good roads, you have to have good bridges, you have to have good sewer, you have to have good water. Without that, you don't really have the ability to do all the things that you want to do in terms of your economic development. When you build infrastructure, you build economic corridors that attract business. The classic example of it in our country is the interstate system. Eisenhower had a vision for a system that would lead people out of the cities in the event of some kind of a catastrophe. But the spin-off of that is that now our country, like no other country in the world, is connected by a road system that has created huge economic opportunities. and a number of jobs all along these interstates where people are working. And I've said for a long time, if you build it, they will come. If you build a bus line, a transit line, a streetcar line, a road system, a bridge, what happens? Businesses begin to pop up. Businesses begin to exist. And what do? They hire people. Every time you build a road or a transit line or a bus line, every time you create infrastructure, what do? You put friends and neighbors to work. Infrastructure is a win-win. As I was driving in here from my hometown of Peoria yesterday, I saw a lot of orange cones. And you know what else I saw? A lot of people working. A lot of Kentuckians working. And they're working in good paying jobs. And I can tell you they're grateful for the leadership of people that are willing to make the kind of investments, whether it's in bridges or roadways or other kinds of transportation opportunities. The best example I can use, when we came into the job, we inherited, as all of us that were involved in the first term of the Obama administration, a lousy economy, maybe the worst recession we'd ever faced. The president persuaded Congress to pass a $870 billion stimulus bill, which was much decried and much criticized. In that bill was $48 billion that came directly to DOT. $28 billion of that went to roads and bridges. $8 billion went to transit. $8 billion went to high-speed rail. $1 billion went to airports. And another $1.5 billion went to the Start the Tiger program. And what did it do? In 2 years, we put thousands of people to work. Again, when you invest in infrastructure, you invest in people, and you invest in economic development, and you invest in corridors. Kentucky benefited mightily from that $48 billion. We worked closely with Governor Beshear and his team and others, some of you in this room, to create those kind of opportunities. And I'm sorry to say that since that time, transportation has languished in Washington. The Congress passed a MAP 21 bill, which was very chintzy, not much money. Now Congress has passed another transportation bill, a 5-year bill, but only funded it for 3 years. And the point that I've been making as I've traveled the country is we need to reinvest and invest in infrastructure. If we do that, we will put thousands of people to work. We will create economic corridors. But you have to have the money to do it. Now, I've already congratulated you on your P3. It's terrific. It's a model. And P3s are important. But what we really need in this country is a big pot of money. The same big pot of money that built the interstate system, built these magnificent bridge structures that we have all over America, that built the transit systems that are now 50 and 60 years old. That big pot of money is called the Highway Trust Fund. It hasn't been replenished. It's broke since 1993. That's the last time we raised the gas tax. And I look at it. No, I've been in Congress. I've been an elected official. No elected official likes to raise taxes. I know that. But if you go to the point that when you invest in infrastructure, you invest in the American people, you invest in jobs, you invest in economic opportunity. The money doesn't stay in Washington. It doesn't go in some politician's pocket. It comes back to America, comes back to Kentucky. We need to raise the gas tax. If we are going to get back to this big pot of money, if Kentucky's going to be able to do all that you want to do in terms of your bridges, some of which are falling down, that I've been to a few years ago. If you want to invest in your roads, P3 is great, but you got to have a national program. We have to get back to a national program, a robust national program. And what I say is raise the gas tax 10 cents a gallon and index it. If the gas tax had been indexed to the cost of living, In 1993, we wouldn't even be having this debate because we would have kept up with inflation and the Highway Trust Fund would be robust. And I know tolling's a bad word in some parts of your state, and I know people don't like the idea of tolling, but you combine P3s with tolling, with a robust highway trust fund, and we get back into being #1 in infrastructure. Today in America, there's 57,000 structurally deficient bridges in America. Think of the jobs that would be created to fix those up. America's one big pothole. You know that. You all know that. We've had these brutal winters. We haven't taken care of our roads. We haven't gotten any help from Washington. And so you've come up with this idea of P3s. Great idea. It's a model. But we need to do more. If you're going to be able to attract the kind of businesses that you've been able to attract and continue that momentum, those businesses that create jobs, you have to have the infrastructure. The other area that you need to think about are your ports, port opportunities. Ports create a lot of jobs. Increasing the capacity at ports creates a lot of jobs. And with now the new channel open at the Panama Canal, there are going to be lots of opportunities for ports all over America. And you need to think about how you're going to be positioned for that. These are multimodal forms of transportation. Very, very important to our country to have a strong port system. But if you want to get your kids and your grandkids to come back to this magnificent state, what will attract them? Jobs. What will attract them? Communities where they can live, many of whom don't want to actually own an automobile, but want a multimodal kind of transportation system with buses, light rail, streetcars, opportunities for Uber, opportunities for the ability to live in communities where you don't necessarily have to own a car. That's what will be an attraction. The next generation is looking for the next generation of transportation. We can't build very many more roads. We need to fix up the ones we have. We can't build very many more bridges. We need to fix up the ones we have. What we can do, though, is offer the different kinds of alternatives that are attracting young people to the Chicagos and the New Yorks and the other urban areas. And that's alternative forms of transportation, and that's what you need to be thinking about. You also need to be thinking about, as you build and rebuild infrastructure, are you putting the fiber optics in that are going to allow for autonomous automobiles? Google, Apple, and the American car manufacturers are investing huge amount of dollars in autonomous automobiles. They're coming. We can't sit on our hands on this. We're moving to a different kind of transportation system. And are you going to be positioned with the kind of fiber optics that allow for autonomous automobiles? Because they're on their way. And the kind of investments that these companies are making is significant. And what kind of position will Kentucky be in to be welcoming for that new generation of transportation? So you need to be thinking about the next generation. I know you're thinking about your roads that are falling apart, your bridges that are falling down, and you need to be thinking about that. But you also need to be thinking about the fact 10 years from now, you're going to have a new generation of young people living in your cities, and they're going to be thinking about transportation. And they're not going to be thinking about it necessarily in the same way that you're thinking about it. In order to get into the autonomous automobile, you have to have the technology in the infrastructure that will direct these cars. And that's what they have in Mountain View, where Google's at. where you have the technology that can tell a car that there's a red light or that there's somebody passing in front of it or there's another automobile. That's the kind of forward, futuristic thinking that you all need to be thinking about, as well as communities where people want to live perhaps without an automobile. And that's really the direction that I see in the future. For now, we need to make these investments. We need to get back to being number one. We need to get to the idea that, frankly, you can't really count on Washington, D.C. right now. You really can't. There's just, the money that they've included in this transportation bill that they passed a year ago is just going to keep us at the status quo. It's not going to take us to the next level. What you're doing here is going to take you to the next level. But you have to do more than that. You have to be forward thinking. And I know all of you do this in this state, and I encourage you to continue to do it. You need to get together, set your priorities, make a list, and then get up every day and figure out, start checking the list off. You got to fix up your existing roads. You got to fix up your existing bridges. You got to have that kind of infrastructure. But what are you doing to plan for the future, for the next generation? The next generation of transportation is not the generation that we're looking at today. It simply is not. And you need to plan for the next generation of transportation. And every dollar that you spend on transportation and infrastructure gets reinvested back into the community, back into the state, back into the people that build it and the people that use it. It's a win-win. This is a no-brainer. And I know you're not sitting around waiting for Washington to take action, and I encourage you to keep moving forward. Keep your list of priorities updated. Keep working together. The communities that work together, the communities that have their act together, the communities that have their list of priorities are the communities that are going to be successful in transportation and infrastructure. And every one of you in this room is a leader in some way or another, either in the business community, working at the state level. And you can't be sitting around waiting for some politician in Washington. Nothing is happening in Washington. Nothing. And, as much as encouragement, and I know all of you have great relationships. I know the Kentucky Chamber has great relationships with your leadership in Washington. But you know what's happening there. Zero. And if we're going to move forward, you have to do it based on your own leadership, based on your own priorities, based on the fact that you're going to stick together. You're not going to be divided. And when you do that, then you create the kind of infrastructure, you create the kind of opportunities that allows you to attract jobs, attract businesses, and really be an opportunity for businesses to look at, because you have the economic development opportunities. And it does start with infrastructure. There's no question about it. I know that. When you look at what's going on in Asia, in China, all over the world, what are they investing in? New airports, new roads, new rail. And that's the way things are going. Now, you do have strong leadership. Obviously, you have the majority leader from your state serving in Washington, serving in the Senate. You have the chairman of the Appropriations Committee from your state, and I know that you lean on those folks heavily and count on them, but things are kind of stuck with not much happening. I do think that you also need to look at who'll be, a year from now we'll have a new president, and we'll have a new cabinet, and we'll have a new government in place. and a new administration. Which one of these two individuals is going to be looking after infrastructure? Which one of these two individuals is going to be looking at trying to find resources to help all of you that have limited resources? And it's an important consideration. And so I'll leave it to you to make those decisions. You're all very smart and realize that there's a lot at stake in this election. So I encourage you to keep doing what you're doing. You've made some great progress. You've really decided what your priorities are, and you've been able to get your legislature to work with you. But if you're going to continue to be at the crossroads of attracting new businesses, you know what you have to do. Work together, common priorities, and then lean on the people that you put in office, but don't rely on them to do the things that really need to be done. So with that, I think we've left some time for questions, and I thank you for including me in your program, and if in the future we can be helpful, we look forward to working with you. Should we take a few questions?
Yes, sir. Just want to remind everyone to use the microphones, please, and we would appreciate you identifying yourself when you come to the mic, and we'll begin.
Hello, Secretary. Emerson Goodwin from Paducah, Kentucky, and Kentucky Care. On the one hand, you say we need a big pot of Superfund money, and then on the other hand, you say, but nothing's happening in Washington. So, and that our elected officials don't want to raise taxes. So it seems like there's not a way to go forward there. Could you address that?
Yeah, look, at the way to go forward is for all of you to implore your elected officials about the importance of the fact that the Highway Trust Fund is broke. It's broke. There is no money. When Congress passes a 5-year bill and funds it for 3 years, you know why? Because they couldn't find the money. And we know what transportation money means. It's not going to stay in Washington. It's going to come back to the states. We know that the Highway Trust Fund built the interstate system, built transit systems, and it was all invested back in America. That's the argument. You have to, when you put your list of priorities together, it can't just be projects. It's got to be, how are we going to fund this? And then you need to just hammer away. You got a Senate election here in Kentucky. We got a presidential election in our country. These are important. Every one of your congresspeople is up for election. And, you know, they get elected to represent you all. Kentucky's been successful. The Kentucky Chamber has been successful in developing relationships. Once you get the relationship, then you got to make the case. I served in Congress for 14 years. I was a congressional staffer for 17. Congress people listen to the people from their districts and their state, particularly when they come with a common agenda, when there's no division. And I suggest that you all get together and figure out if you can support the idea of raising the gas tax and indexing it. And if you can, make it number one and harp away at it throughout this campaign season. Now, maybe you can't do that. I don't know. I'm going to leave it to you to decide that. Without that big pot of money, America is never going to get back to being number one in infrastructure. We're never going to. The largest unemployment sector in America today is in the building trades, people that build roads and bridges. The largest sector. They deserve better. These are good people. These are our friends and neighbors.
Secretary
Yes,
LaHood. Oh, sorry.
Oh,
Let's go back here to the back first.
Hi, thank you. I'm Ashley Watts with the Kentucky Chamber, and I wanted to ask a question about P3. So now that we've been successful in passing the P3 legislation, we're all looking at potential projects. So in your mind, what is one of the most successful transportation projects that has been built by P3?
There's a TIFIA loan program in Washington at DOT that you should look at. That's a pot of money that you can, so you take your private dollars, you take the federal DOT money, you take state DOT money, and you put it all together. The Silver Line. In Washington, D.C., we have the metro system. The whole city of Washington's connected by the metro, except that you can't get from downtown Washington to Dulles Airport. So we approved a P3 to build what they call the Silver Line. It's the last leg of metro. It's $1 billion project. Couldn't have done it without a P3. So we got private investors to build all the train stations. That's their investment. We got the TIFIA loan program at DOT to kick in millions of dollars. State of Virginia, state of Maryland, DC, all kicked in money. It's a model for a P3. $1 billion project. That's what these things cost. And by 2020, Washington, D.C. will be connected to Dulles Airport. LaGuardia Airport just announced they're going to completely renovate LaGuardia, which Vice President Biden called a third world airport because it's fallen down. It was all done with a P3. The private investors come in with their money for construction. City of New York, State of New York, State of New Jersey, and the federal government, the TIFIA loan program. So I think what you need to look at for your P3, and you all know what your priorities are, bridges, major highways, and in some communities what they've done, they've gone to a streetcar system or a light rail system that delivers people to airports. I'm not going to tell you you know what your priorities are. Think about light rail, which is expensive. Think about bus rapid transit, which is expensive. Think about streetcars. And, you know, obviously you got a bunch of bridges that need to be repaired. I've been there. I've seen them. And then you've got your interstates that are running through your communities. There'll be no shortage of projects. And I guarantee you, there'll be no shortage of private dollars. And you can go to the US DOT and tap into that TIFIA loan program. Boom. That's it. Yes.
Secretary LaHood, good morning. My name is David Byerman. I serve as the director of our state legislative staff in Frankfurt. We have about 400 staff that are nonpartisan that serve both Democrats and Republicans. In that role, you know, I see every day that we have honorable, good public servants who are in it for the right reasons, who are able to come together at the state legislative level to work on important issues. Now, you have a unique perspective because as a Republican serving in a Democratic cabinet, I know you walked the walk when it came to bipartisanship in Washington. But candidly, it seems to a lot of us outside of Washington that there is just a systematic process problem with Congress right now where even if you have a very compelling case like you have made for infrastructure funding as a business investment, even if there is a really good case to be made, it is almost like the Democrats and Republicans in Washington are going off a different set of facts. You know, they are not communicating with each other. They're talking right past each other. So I guess my question for you, sir, is a little bit more of a system question. It's less making the case for how we should invest in infrastructure. But from your perspective as a Republican who served in a Democratic cabinet, how can we get our leaders in Washington to talk to each other in a very productive way? Because right now, that is simply not happening.
Look, we have to elect people that believe in the jobs they're being elected to. And here's what I mean by that. You have a certain segment in the House of Representatives, where I serve, by the way, you got about 40 or 50 House members who were elected under two umbrellas, Republican and Tea Party. So of these 40 to 50, many of them don't even believe in government. They vote no on everything. This is the crowd that ran Boehner out of office. This is the crowd that votes no on everything. This is the crowd that doesn't believe that there's a national role for our government in most anything. And there's a handful in the Senate, elected as Republicans, but also under the Tea Party umbrella. And those people can stand in the way of any progress, and have. Until we get beyond the idea. When I got elected to Congress in I got elected in 94, I took the oath in 95, Gingrich became Speaker, Republicans came into the majority after 40 years, Bill Clinton was in the White House. Nobody was more determined than Gingrich and Clinton. They both had agendas, but you know what they believed in? They believed in the government. They believed there was a role for government. We passed 3 balanced budgets, welfare reform, Medicare reform. We passed 2 transportation bills with over 400 votes in the House and over 80 votes in the Senate. Why? Because we had people in these jobs who wanted to reform Congress and reform government. Nobody wanted to do that more than Gingrich. But they also knew what their roles were, to get stuff done. We have so many issues in America, not the least of which is infrastructure, immigration, tax reform. The list goes on, and what? Nothing's being done because there are a certain number of people who don't believe in it. They don't even believe in their jobs. They are elected to say no. So what we need is to elect people who believe that Congress has a role to play to solve problems, whether it's infrastructure, immigration, tax reform, whatever it is. Until we get back to that, we are stuck. And you're not going to count, don't count on Washington for anything. You're going to have to do it on your own. And you're off to a good start with this P3. There needs to be a lot more, but we are where we are. And there are a lot of good people in Washington, a lot. My son's a congressman. I'm proud of him. He's serving in the district that I served in. So, listen, when I level this criticism at Congress, you know, in a sense, you know, my son's there and I was there. But I know what I'm talking about here. For 4.5 years, we tried to get Congress to pass a strong, robust transportation bill and fund it. That's what we need, and a lot more of it.
Take this question.
Great. Secretary, thank you for being here. My name's Ryan Eller. I run a nonprofit out of my home state here in Kentucky, as well as a media company in California. And a friend of mine in California is working on a project called the Hyperloop. And I've become fascinated with this idea of high-speed transportation. And I noticed early on in the administration, there was a big plan to implement high-speed rail across America. And I noticed this huge gap when I looked at that map that is often existing when we do maps like these, where there was nothing. And that gap was around the Appalachian Mountains. And so my question to you is, where are we at right now with the development of that plan to get high-speed rail? And how do we in Kentucky not get left behind with these things that you're talking about with
the next
high-speed
generation
rail?
of transportation for the next generation is rail. It's not the interstate. We've built the interstate. The next generation, remember this, not for you, not for me, but for our kids and grandkids. People love to ride trains. Now, when President Obama came into office, part of the economic stimulus, part of the $48 billion, $8 billion for high-speed rail. The lion's share of that went to California. California, over the next 10 years, is building true high-speed rail. 200-mile-an-hour train from San Francisco to LA to San Diego. It's going to be done. Part of it is because of Jerry Brown's leadership. Part of it is because of President Obama's vision. Along the Northeast Corridor between Washington and New York, Every Amtrak train every day is full of people. Why? Because it's an easy way to get from Washington to Philly, to New York, to wherever, to Newark, whatever. People like riding trains. And particularly younger people who don't want to own a car. Now, if you want to be a part of this, you can be a part of it. There are lots of organizations. But again, you have to have the leadership. The Kentucky Chamber needs to decide if rail is going to be a part of your infrastructure vision. Is it going to be roads? Is it going to be bridges? Of course, because that's existing. Is it going to be rail? Is it going to be light rail? Is it going to be streetcars? Is it going to be high-speed rail? Unfortunately, when the $8 billion was allocated, some of it went to Illinois, some went to the Northeast Corridor to Amtrak, some to California. Some governors didn't want it, so be it. And, but I'm telling you what the next generation's looking for. And if you want to keep your kids and your grandkids when they graduate from these great universities in this state, you need to make sure they can have access to Uber, to Lyft, to light rail, to high-speed rail, to all kinds of different forms of transportation. That is going to be the attraction for them. A job, affordable housing, and good transportation. So we need, President Obama's leaving office. We need people with a vision about these things. There's a lot of people in this room with a vision. There's no doubt about that. The Kentucky Chamber has a vision. No doubt about that. And I'd say the Kentucky legislature and the governor has a vision. And P3 was certainly at the top of the list. Now you got to keep going down the list. Don't stop now. Don't stop now. I don't know what's on the list. Make it happen. Part of what has to be on the list is funding at the national level. You have the chairman of the Appropriations Committee and the majority leader from your state. They've been speakers here. You got to tell them what the priorities are, got to be unified, hang together, good things will happen. Thank you all very much.